Hello everyone. Thank you for joining us today for this webinar on biodefense and infectious diseases funding opportunities. My name is Jonathan Atlas. I'm the Senior Director of Business Development at the FreeMind Group. I will be giving you the webinar today. A few housekeeping issues to begin with. First of all, you can download the presentation directly through the app you're using to view this, and if for some reason you're having difficulties with that, or you just didn't remember to, or maybe you're viewing this on our YouTube channel at a later date, I'll be sending out this to all the attendees, or the registrants rather, via email, and it also will be available on our website. If you have any questions, you can type them in to the chat tab, and I will try to address as many of them as possible towards the end of the webinar. Additionally, we do have an additional webinar on the schedule for April, I believe 5th. Let me double check that. It's either, yes, April 5th on the topic of oncology, funding for oncology and cancer research. So if that's anywhere within the realm of interests for you or for anyone you're familiar with, please feel free to share that or join in yourselves. So let's dive in. A little bit initially about who's speaking with you today. So the FreeMind Group has been around for about 18 years now, about 60 full-time employees. We work across the life sciences, anywhere between tiny seed stage startups all the way up to some of the largest companies out there. We work with academics, research centers, pretty much across the board. Submit typically 400 to 500 applications a year on behalf of our clients. And basically what we do is we consult and help both strategize and produce the applications. Generally speaking, we identify the most relevant funding opportunities for any scientific project that we're trying to get funded. We help strategize to maximize that specific application's chances of success. We manage the production process of the application, even when it's complex projects, multi-PI, multifaceted projects. We do lead the joint application writing process as well, and we support, when relevant, contract negotiations. And essentially all of this is speaking towards the fact that we really do view non-dilutive funding as a strategic financial tool, and if you treat it that way, it can be much more strategic than it is viewed by some people, and something that is much more reliable of a source of funding than in many cases would be the case if you, as an example, just submit one application and hope you're awarded. But enough about us. Let's talk about the pocket of money here. And generally speaking, this is specifically the NIH. We're talking about a pocket of money of currently, of the over $32 billion the NIH has in their budget. This is last year, by the way. The vast majority of that is actually going out to extramural research. So currently about $27 billion. And specifically looking at NIAID, which is probably the most, there is funding for biodefense from other agencies as well, and we'll touch on that. And there's also a lot of funding not from the NIH, but it was starting with the NIH. The most relevant agency is NIAID, and generally speaking, their budget is one of the highest, actually the second highest in the NIH, and it's consistently anywhere between $4.5 and $5 billion a year. Looking at the pocket of money from the NIH in general, you're talking about currently about $5.25 billion going to infectious diseases. Most of that is from NIAID. Almost $2 billion specifically for biodefense. Again, much of that from NIAID. NIAID itself has one of the best success rates of the NIH. The last success rates they published were for 2016, obviously, and they have on the research projects grants a 24% success rate, in contrast with a 19.1 general NIH success rate for research project grants, and that's really on the high end of the spectrum. It's one of the highest. They're the NIGMS has slightly, not slightly, almost 30% success rate, but short of that, it really is one of the best places to submit in general. In terms of what they're looking to fund, so typically newly appeared pandemics or general bugs in a specific population, or something that has existed but is increased rapidly recently, or changing geographical regions and basically causing some, not necessarily a pandemic, but major shifts and changes, something that's emerging. Also, anything on their category A, B, and C priority pathogens list, and there's a link to that list here on the side of my presentation, so feel free to take a look at that. But generally speaking, they cover a pretty wide variety of bugs in what they're interested in. The way to approach them, there are a lot of solicitations, and we'll cover some examples, but it's important for me to start by saying that there are, generally speaking, 3 types of funding routes. Solicited, and the examples will be, most of the examples we'll be discussing will be solicited mechanisms. So basically, they will lay out a specific scope of research, types of indications, stages of development. They'll lay out what they're interested in funding, and if you can adhere to that in what you are proposing, then you should submit through that mechanism. Something that is very important to note and utilize when relevant is that a very significant, very significant amount, most of the NIH's funds go out every year through unsolicited mechanisms. So there are definitely fantastic solicited mechanisms, and when what you're looking to fund is a fit for something like that, obviously use it. But even if you look around and you don't really find something that's exactly intended on funding what you're looking to fund, utilize the investigator-initiated mechanisms. There are R21s and R01s, depending on the stage of development. R21s for earlier preliminary research with a budget cap typically of about $275,000 plus indirect costs. R01s, more established research, more advanced research, moving in even preclinical and sometimes early stage clinical trials. And that would be typically, well, there's no hard budget cap, but we would definitely suggest not asking for more than $2.5 million without pre-approval in that case. SBIRs have no specific, well, there are specific scopes published for specific SBIRs, but the Omnibus SBIR, again, can cover anything that is of interest to any of the agencies, and obviously in what we're discussing, NIAID pretty much covers anything that has to do with infectious diseases and biodefense, so there'll always be a target there. Definitely go ahead and establish interest in advance, speak with a program officer. But I guess the take-home message here, and this is maybe more important than any of the examples I'm going to give you, this is a source of funding that's relevant no matter what. If you have research that is within what NIAID, as an example, is interested in, submit to NIAID if you don't find a good fit within any of the mechanisms I'm going to mention, or going on the NIH website and conducting a search, or getting a consultant to help you find something, and nothing comes up. Still, utilize the investigator-initiated mechanisms, speak with NIAID. Most of their money goes out with no specific stipulations and not in answering a specific call. So definitely utilize that, and that's very important. A third source of funding in terms of a type of submission or a funding route would be BAAs, broad agency announcements. And we'll discuss quite a few of those today. And they're typically more broad than a specific call, but they are defined in terms of scope, hence broad agency announcement. And they're not always, but typically they're more rolling in the sense that they're less deadline centric, and you can typically submit an application at any time during the period that call is open. And as I mentioned, we'll discuss quite a few of those in a minute. And we'll start with the NIH in terms of the examples of the funding mechanisms themselves, and starting with preclinical funding. So the first example I wanted to discuss with you is called Partnerships for the Development of Tools to Advance Therapeutic Discovery for Select Antimicrobial Resistant Gram-Negative Bacteria. That's a mouthful, but generally speaking, this is an R01, so it's one of the standard NIH mechanisms. The deadline is May 17th. So definitely start working on that if this is something that could be relevant. In general terms, this is a very large mechanism in terms of the scope of funding for the NIH. especially considering that we're discussing funding for preclinical work. The total award here can be over $5 million. For preclinical work, that is unheard of almost. It is divided over up to 5 years, so you can't ask for $5 million in year one. But they will fund you over a long period of time with pretty substantial amounts of funding, up to $750,000 a year, plus indirect costs. So I made it a relatively conservative calculation here with 30% overhead, but it can definitely be 40 for companies as well. And an additional $300,000 initially in year one for purchasing equipment. And what this would generally cover is milestone-driven projects focused on developing and utilizing novel predictive assays, models, or research tools. The caveat here is it has to specifically be in relation to either CRE, MDR Acinetobacter, or MDR Pseudomonas aeruginosa, which I always have trouble pronouncing correctly. But anyway, if you have research that could be relevant in one of those 3 specific bugs, and you're at this stage of development, this is a fantastic mechanism because very few mechanisms will offer this type of level of funding for this stage of research. They would expect you to complete the stage of developing the actual assay by the 3rd year of the 5 years of funding. And from that point on, it would be validating and moving forward with that. But generally speaking, a very interesting mechanism. It hasn't been around for a very long time. It's pretty new. So typically with new mechanisms, and this obviously is not always the case, but in our experience, in many cases with new mechanisms, the first deadline or 2 will have less competition because not everybody's aware of the mechanism. So utilize that. The Counteract program basically is designed to develop new therapeutics to prevent the damage from chemical threats. And this specific mechanism from the Counteract program, and this is a collaboration of a few institutes in the NIH. This is a UO1, so it's a collaborative research agreement. Basically, it means it's a bit more hands-on than an R1. They don't make decisions for you, but they do like to stay up to date in what's happening with the research. They will definitely give you advice on how to construct the study in many cases. Again, your decision, your final call, but it is a bit more hands-on than just your standard SBIR as an example. By the way, in our experience, many of our clients have found that very, very beneficial, so don't shy away from that. But regardless, the funding here, because we're talking about relatively early research, we're talking about basically identification of therapeutic leads. And the supported activities are confirmation of molecular targets, demonstrating initially in vitro activity, in vivo efficacy, again, preliminary in vivo efficacy, obviously, ADME, tox evaluations, and PK/PD. So early stuff. Up to $300,000 a year plus overhead again. So over the entire 3-year period, could be about 1.2 million. And again, that's a relatively conservative overhead calculation for a company. So if you're at this stage of development and you have something that could be of interest in terms of the scope of what they're interested in mitigating the damage from chemical threats, this is a very, very, it's a great mechanism because essentially there's not as much competition as using something that's very broad. This is lead identification for chemical threats. That's the only thing you're competing against. So if you're a good fit here, it's definitely something you should utilize. And also, worth mentioning, the deadline is September 12th, so you do have enough time to really develop your application until then. From the Counteract program, the follow-on, I guess, to the previous mechanism is their lead optimization mechanism, and this would cover IND-enabling studies, pivotal efficacy studies in animals, GMP production, and human safety clinical trials, so more advanced preclinical work. And basically, this mechanism does not have a budget. It has the same deadline, September 12th as well. There's no budget cap here. They'll fund you for up to 5 years. That being said, you should not ask for $15 million without making sure they're okay with that in advance. It's not impossible, but in our experience, asking for more than $2.5 million without pre-approval is definitely not advisable. Something interesting about this mechanism as well, and this is actually alluded to or actually noted specifically in the wording of the solicitation. This is a stepping stone towards receiving BARDA funding. BARDA actually looks at the recipients here, and there's a list of things to meet in this actual solicitation that if you meet those things, BARDA will very seriously consider you for follow-on funding. And we'll touch on BARDA in a minute, but and you'll see why that's important because the funding there is very substantial. Multi-million dollar awards. So that's a very important thing about this mechanism specifically. And in general, any project that's of interest to BARDA that is moving toward the clinic or in the early clinic that has government backing and has very positive results, obviously that's something they'd be interested in. But this is specifically noted as something that they keep their eyes on. So keep that in mind as well. It's a fantastic mechanism. Moving forward in terms of the stages of development, still staying within the NIH, we'll discuss some opportunities for clinical funding. We'll start with something that's in terms of scope very, very small, especially for clinical studies. But this is not actually to fund a clinical study. This is something called a clinical trial planning grant, an R34. R34s and various different NIH institutes have them, but in this case we're talking about NIAID, obviously, because of the area of interest. May 12th is the deadline. They'll fund typically up to about 200,000 total awards, something in the vicinity of 150,000 plus indirect costs. And generally speaking, there's a whole list of activities that they would fund in terms of getting ready to conduct a clinical trial. I've brought some examples here, but you can look at the solicitation. And for all the examples, I'm giving the solicitation numbers on the side here. So for this one, it's PAR 16272. And go ahead and look at that, and there's more information on exactly what the activities they would be interested in funding or at least allow funding for. But some prominent examples are establishing a team, finding collaborators, finding the clinical sites, designing the study, developing the protocol, the clinical protocol for the actual clinical trial. A lot of different things that typically take up a lot of time, and they realize there's a gap in the, a company conduct their preclinical work, and now they have to go ahead and plan a clinical trial. That period of time costs money, and sometimes that can be an issue. We're not talking about multi-million dollar awards here, but getting $200,000 to cover you during that period is a fantastic thing. So this is something that definitely, if this is a good fit for you, you may want to consider. Moving forward to some slightly more substantial levels of funding, NIAID have a phase 2 SBIR that is designed specifically for funding clinical trials in their area of interest. In NIAID, in general, the ID in NIAID is infectious diseases, I'll put it that way. This is a U44, so it's a collaborative phase 2 SBIR, so again, a bit more hands-on, and May 12th is the deadline. And on one hand, they have the standard SBIR budget caps of $1.5 million for a phase 2, actually $725 for a fast track. This is true in general, but in this case, it's also specifically stated in the solicitation that for specific select topics, the NIH has received a waiver from the SBIA to exceed the cap. Now, this is always true. If what you do is on one of those lists, and each agency has their own list, then you can technically ask for pre-approval to exceed the hard cap on the SBIR. That being said, when they specifically stated in the solicitation, it means they realize it may be much more prevalent with this mechanism because they're looking to fund clinical trials. And one of the areas in NIAID that they have received the waiver to fund higher levels of funding is, as an example, and there are a few, but discovery and development of therapeutics for infectious diseases, which pretty much covers the vast majority of what NIAID does. In terms of the scope, oh, I'm sorry. This is from the wrong slide. But generally speaking, I'll cover this verbally. They will fund essentially clinical trials that are of interest to the goals of NIAID. So essentially any infectious disease, especially level A, B, and C pathogens and emerging infectious diseases, any clinical trials in that respect is something that they would fund. Going a little bit higher in the levels of funding, NIAID have a clinical trial implementation cooperative agreement, and this is another UO1, not an SBIR, but a UO1, and in this case, we're talking about a deadline of May 12th. There's no budget cap here. They'll fund you for up to 5 years, and essentially, in terms of the scope of the type of trials, it's very similar to the SBIR. The main difference is it's not an SBIR, and historically they fund higher dollar amounts. This is defined as funding high-risk clinical trials and mechanistic studies associated with high-risk clinical trials. It has an RO1 equivalent, not a UO1, for low-risk clinical trials, and you can go on the NIH website and make sure your clinical trial is either a high-risk or a low-risk clinical trial, but in our experience, very, very few clinical trials are actually defined as a low-risk clinical trial. So this is the example I'm bringing you, although, as I mentioned, there is an additional mechanism for what does fall under the category of low-risk clinical trials. If you are conducting, or rather thinking of conducting a clinical trial in pretty much any infectious disease area, hopefully it's of interest to NIAID because they cover pretty much everything that is in the realm of infectious diseases. This is very broad in that sense, and it's something that would fund high dollar amounts, so this is really a great mechanism. Moving forward, BARDA. Basically, BARDA, well, first of all, they're the Biomedical Advanced Research and Development Authority, and their mission is to develop and procure medical countermeasures that address chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear accidents, incidents, and attacks, pandemic influenza, and emerging infectious diseases. One of the interesting things about BARDA, first of all, they're very approachable. They are probably the most responsive agency that we work with in general. If you're interested in looking into whether it's a good fit for you or not, they'll actually set up a meeting with you. It's called a tech watch. You fly out, you go to their offices, you present to them, and they'll sit down with you and say, listen, we like this. Maybe you should consider doing A and B, and then we really think you'd be ready for our funding. So they give you feedback on what you're doing, tell you if you're ready for BARDA funding, you're not ready for BARDA funding. And so they're fantastic to work with. They fund an area of research that's in many cases much harder to fund via grants and non-dilutive funding. We're talking about clinical trials and forward all the way through development and to the market. And basically, it's very hard to compete with BARDA awards in terms of the size of the award. Awards range from 10, 15, 20, 30 million to 60 million, and there are awards of over $100 million. They cover you. If they fund your phase 1, assuming you meet your goals, they'll fund your phase 2, your phase 3, and they take you all the way. So it's milestone driven. You have to complete, one phase to continue to the next. But generally speaking, we're talking about very, very significant levels of funding here. The application process, and this is true for various DoD submissions as well, is it will start with a white paper or a quad chart, and basically this is usually called a pre-application, and this is, although it's a much shorter document than the full application, it's very important to construct this properly, make it very concise, very coherent, and really convey the value proposition well of what you're proposing to do, because most applications do not progress beyond this stage. So the pre-application, although not a very hefty document, with BARDA, it's 2 pages for the quad chart with the cover paper, and then another maybe 10 for the white paper. With the DoD, sometimes it's just a 2-page document in general. But regardless, make it count, because as soon as you do progress beyond this phase and you're asked to submit a full application, your chances of success skyrocket. Definitely not in the bag yet, but we're talking about significantly higher success rates. So it's a very important phase, even though it's not a lot of work. Once you're asked to submit a full application, you have to hit the ground running. Typically, you have 60 to 90 days to produce the full application. You produce that. Hopefully, it's favorably reviewed. And this is a very hefty document. And hopefully, you move forward to contract negotiations and receive the award. Generally speaking, the specific BAA that's relevant here for this webinar's purposes is called their BAA for Advanced Research and Development of Chemical, Biological, Radiological, and Nuclear Medical Countermeasures. There's no budget cap, as I mentioned. The funding can be very, very substantial. And they would, in terms of the areas of research, that they would fund clinical trials in its vaccines, antitoxins, therapeutic proteins, antimicrobial therapeutics, radiological and nuclear threat medical countermeasures, chemical threat medical countermeasures, and clinical diagnostics. So various areas of research, all related to the BARDA mission. But if you're either moving toward the clinic or in the clinic in any of these areas, and you haven't considered approaching BARDA for funding, it's definitely worth doing. At least, having a tech watch and really gauging where you are in terms of what you would need to do to be eligible for their funding. Something additional that I would like to discuss, and this is related to BARDA, is an initiative called CARB-X. CARB-X is basically, it's a global public-private partnership, and it's focused on antibiotic-resistant bacteria and developing new antimicrobials for them. It's funded by BARDA, NIAID, Wellcome Trust, AMR Center, and also in England, CLSI and MassBio. And it's essentially an accelerator, so it's not really just a grant or a contract. They provide funding, but they also provide business services, scientific services. They're currently planning to make $350 million in funding available over the next 5 years. There have already been 2 cycles of applications. They received a staggering number of applications. They expected to receive about 50. They've received 350. So there's a lot of responsiveness to this. And if you are at a preclinical stage and you're developing something that is related to multi-drug resistance or antibacterial resistance, this is something you should definitely consider. As I mentioned, it's not a standard grant. It's support on various different levels, and they're really looking to move you forward into the clinic effectively, and also they would probably very seriously consider, if you were part of this program and moved into the clinic, you're a prime candidate to receive funding either from DTRA or from BARDA for the clinical development as well. So this is really great accelerator to look into if this is your area of interest. And we're currently, based on some conversations we've had with them, expecting a new cycle to be announced in September. The first winners are going to be awarded probably this month, actually. And this is a very new program. It started, I think it was announced in June of last year. And then, like I said, the first winners are going to be awarded very soon. Department of Defense. So the Department of Defense, will discuss a few branches of the Department of Defense, namely DARPA, DTRA, and the military, specifically the USAMRIC or USAMRC. And I'll touch on their missions here very shortly. DARPA, their mission is to maintain the technological superiority of the United States military by sponsoring revolutionary, high payoff research that bridges the gap between fundamental discoveries and their military use. I've given the example in the past of Q from James Bond. They're not looking for just your incremental standard improvements on things that are existing. They're looking for groundbreaking things that are truly disruptive in their fields. And definitely not just focused on what we're discussing today, but since they do delve in that as well, I think it's worth mentioning here. DTRA is the Defense Threat Reduction Agency under the DoD, and their goal is, or rather mission, is to safeguard the United States and its allies from weapons of mass destruction. The military, or rather the USARMC program's goal is to provide solutions to medical problems of importance to the American warfighter at home and abroad. And obviously within that scope, many things that are relevant to what we're discussing today do fall. Starting with DTRA. The funding mechanism that's most relevant from DTRA is a BAA, a broad agency announcement. Has no specific deadline. It's open until it closes, pretty much, and the application will be reviewed in relation to when you submit. So they don't wait for the BAA to close and then review all the applications. If you submit tomorrow, it would be reviewed much sooner than if you submitted in 3 months. And they cover various areas: detection of both chemical and biological threats, information systems capability development, protection for individuals and for collectives, hazard mitigation, threat agent science, medical pretreatments, medical diagnostics, medical therapeutics, threat surveillance. So they cover a lot of areas that are related to chemical and biological threats in this BAA. And if this is somewhere, we're talking about biodefense, so biological threats may be very relevant for a lot of what you are developing. So in most of these cases, this is a fantastic source of funding. They typically fund, they don't fund really early discovery work, but they do go much earlier than BARDA, and they also do move at least into the early clinic. So they cover a fairly broad spectrum of stages of development. The military, or specifically USAMRIC, the United States Army Medical Research and Materials Command, they have a BAA for extra-medical research, and there are various areas that this covers, namely military infectious diseases, combat casualty care, military operational medicine, clinical and rehabilitative medicine, military biological defense, medical chemical defense, medical simulation, and information sciences. And there's a lot more details in the actual BAA, and the best way to find it is probably Googling what I have here on the sidebar, the W81XWH17R BAA1. That'll bring you pretty much straight to the PDF. There's no budget cap here. You do have to justify what you ask for. So don't take the fact that there's no budget cap here as authorization to submit a $100 million BARDA. Maybe you would submit to BARDA or a $60 million request. Historically, they don't fund at that level, and you do have to justify what you ask for, but there's no technical budget cap. So if you're talking about something that costs $2, $3, $5 million, $1 million, $500,000, just make sure they're interested, and it should be fine. Generally speaking, this is very broad in terms of the scope. Each one of these categories has various different subcategories that, again, you'd be able to find. I did not have enough room to really add all of that to my deck today, but go ahead and take a look, and if you're in one of these areas, there's a significant chance that this could be a good fit for you. And by the way, this mechanism works in a similar way to what I described earlier, with a pre-application and then a full application upon invitation. DARPA, as I mentioned earlier, they're looking for really groundbreaking things, something that would be very disruptive. Having another antimicrobial agent that's similar but different, something that's, like I said, an incremental improvement of the current state of the art is really not what they're looking for. They want something that will disrupt the field, and in this case, they do fund things that have to do specifically with infectious diseases. But again, it would have to be something very significant, not another vaccine for X or a vaccine for Y, or an antimicrobial agent, or I don't know, detection method for X. We're talking about something that would really disrupt the field. If you have something like that, This could be a fantastic source of funding. We're talking about $750,000. They will fund very, very early research based on a disruptive idea. So if you're at an early stage and you have an idea that you think is fantastic that could really change things, $750,000 for something that early is a lot of money. So it's definitely something you should consider if this is where you're positioned and it's a good fit for you in that sense. I want to discuss in general the review process for many of these mechanisms. And the example I gave here in terms of the specific review criteria is taken from the NIH, but this stands true generally for any review process in our experience. They're essentially, it's a risk management process. They're not investors in the sense that they want a direct ROI on what they invest in you, but they're investing in you, and their goal is just different from an investor. They still have an incentive to reach that goal, and to do that effectively, they want to maximize the efficiency of their investment. So it is definitely a risk management process. They're weighing the strengths of your application and what you're conveying you're going to be doing with their funds against the risks. So you have to, the response in terms of is, do you have or do you not have the proper A, leadership, B, environment, C, significance, and D, innovation? The response to all of those questions definitely has to be yes. But what really will either win you the award or not allow you to be awarded is having a top-notch scientific approach. That is the heart of the application, and that is what eventually will make sure, hopefully, you are awarded. The way to maximize your chances is taking a real systematic approach to this. As you've seen, especially in this field, there are a lot of sources of funding that could be relevant to pretty much anything. Most of the sources, as you saw, that I discussed, in terms of the scope of what they're looking to fund, they're pretty broad. Chances are most of the people listening here today could approach almost all of these sources of funding. Various different stages of development could target a specific subset of what I presented, but we're not talking about one or two sources of funding that are relevant for almost anything in this field. So basically, you have to understand the interest of each agency. You have to present a complete and focused project. You have to ask for what is truly necessary. Leverage on collaborations when relevant. Don't name drop. Don't add Harvard Medical School just because you know somebody there. If there's there's a gap in your capabilities and there's somebody there that you want to collaborate with that will bring a real contribution to what you're doing, absolutely, that's fantastic. So do it, but do it in the right way. And target the right mechanism. There are various different pockets of money, as you saw, different sizes of awards, different success rates. You have to, what we do specifically is conduct a thorough strategic assessment. We look at everything that you're trying to fund. We look at everything the landscape has to offer, and we match that in the best way possible. And that allows creating a multi-submission granting strategy, namely taking each project we're trying to fund and filing applications to any different source that could be relevant. Sometimes you play around with it to a certain extent to present it in the right way, because different agencies do have different priorities. But generally speaking, multiplexing in this way is truly the way that you will be able to maximize your chances of receiving awards. And the way we do it is basically we have two core services that we provide. It's essentially a strategic assessment and the application production process. The strategic assessment is an ongoing process, but it's basically about creating the strategy, understanding what you do, understanding how that relates to what the sources of funding are, translating that into a set of actionable items, and then moving on that with the actual production of applications. Generally speaking, if anybody has any questions, either if you've added them or if you'd like to add them now, I will be addressing them now. But regardless, I have covered most of what I wanted to cover in terms of the examples. So let me just open this up here. Okay, so let's see. So there are a few questions here that are very, very specific. I'll try to answer them by email because I don't think it's relevant for everybody that's attending here, but I'll try to find some slightly more broad questions. Okay, so here's an interesting one. As a European company, can I apply for this type of funding? So pretty much across the board, the answer to that with all of these sources of funding and all these mechanisms is yes. One exception to that would be the SBIR that I mentioned. You cannot submit an SBIR as a non-US company. But short of that, pretty much everything I mentioned is open with no geographical restrictions. So that shouldn't be a major game changer in that respect. Let's see here. Okay. There's a question about companion R01s and SBIRs. When there is an R01 or similar, is there always an SBIR on the same topic? No, definitely not always. In many cases, there are companion SBIRs and R01s, or at least one that is very similar, and then based on the scope of the research, the funding, the specific guidelines, whether what you're looking to do is something that you can present in a milestone-driven way or in a hypothesis-driven way, which is essentially one of the major differences between an R01 and an SBIR in terms of how to present the science. So generally speaking, that is what should guide your decision if you are SBIR eligible, obviously. But that is in the case where there are both options, and that's not always the case. It is in many cases, but not always. So let's see here. This is definitely very specific. Funding for Canadian companies, yes. Canadian and same as European. The answer, same question asked for European companies. The answer stands strong for Canadian companies and for any other companies for that matter, with no geographical restrictions. Let's see here. Wow, a lot of questions. Thank you, guys. I'm scrolling through, so thanks for your patience. There's a question here about success rates. It's hard to give you specific success rates for specific mechanisms because in many cases those are not published. NIH in general has typically success rates of, depending on the area of research, anything between 12 and 20% most years. That being said, in infectious diseases, it's typically on the higher end of that spectrum. DOD varies very drastically between different years and deadlines, but I think it's fair to say that usually still we're talking about lower than 20%. Our success rates are a lot higher than that, by the way, but this is not an infomercial, so I'll spare you that. A lot of questions here. Yes, if I see a few questions about not being able to download the slides, so I will send them out to everybody who attended at least by tomorrow. Wow, guys, this is a lot of questions. I'll try to address as many of them as I can via email because a lot of them are very specific. Okay, I think I've covered most of the general questions. So thank you very much for attending. As I mentioned, the slides will be available. This will be the recording will be on our YouTube channel, so you can feel free to share that as well. I appreciate all of your attendance, and I look forward to seeing you, as I mentioned, April 5th in our oncology webinar. Thank you very much.